The rat pawed at the dark bark bedding and moved to explore his new home. It stopped and placed its tiny front paws on the glass and stared at me. Lamia didn't hesitate. The red snake lowered her head from the makeshift tree branch and sunk her fangs into his soft flesh. I listened inadvertently to the rat's high-pitched squeal of pain, and my entire body quivered. I felt for the creature. I understood him. I, too, am a mouse who has lain with vipers, offered up my soft, fuzzy warmth to their cold, rough forms. And on that cheery note, hello everybody, and welcome to OCN Writer's Room. My name is Andre, I'll be your host, and we are talking with some Denver creatives about their creative work and creative processes. With me today is Bobby Crew, who wrote the book that you guys just heard from. It is called Dining with Devils. Bobby, would you like to go ahead and say hello?
Hello, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk. I was really excited, and it was a little weird listening to somebody read my words, I suppose, but yeah.
All right, so let's start with the basic questions. I understand that you wrote this book, or at the very least, your name is on it.
Yes, all of the stories are mine. So it was a solo anthology.
There you go. It's called Dining with Devils. This is a horror anthology with seven stories.
Yes.
Thank you. So why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about it?
So Dining with Devils is a collection of horror stories kind of centered around exploring the theme of what happens when you get too close to your demons, whether figuratively or literally or physically. And it just kind of explores the hell that we can create when we let ourselves explore the darker natures, I suppose.
Sure. So, for those of you who read it, you understand that this is a bit of a conventional horror novel, or unconventional horror novel. The horror in it's very personal. There's not a lot of slashery moments.
Yeah, I prefer thought-provoking and thematic horror. Also, a lot of the stories in the collection are told from LGBTQ perspectives. Not all of them, but most of them. And I mean, slasher stories are fun, but that's just not quite the style that I like. Like, I really like horror that makes you think or feel or wonder or kind of change your mind about things, or like shows you how you can look at things a slightly different way. Yeah.
So, on that kind of note then, do you have any main inspirations for writing this book? Like, any specific reason that you wanted to write a horror anthology?
So I've been writing horror since I was 8 years old. And for whatever reason, when I was 8, I had just decided all the other kids wanted to be like police officers and firefighters. And I was like, I want to be a writer. And nobody understood why. And so yeah, been writing horror forever. Kind of scared my family a little bit. They thought they were raising a serial killer or something.
So you wanted to make sure that those police officer and firefighter kids would grow up with a job to do?
Yes, But as far as my inspiration goes, it kind of varies from story to story. It would be like the first story that I wrote in this collection was The Dollhouse Tree, and it was probably the most tame story in the bunch, if you've noticed. And the most recent one was the last one in the story, which is Trauma, which was the darkest thing I've ever written, I think, so far. So just like, it's kind of an exploration of my writing over 8 or so years. But my inspiration comes from different things. Sometimes it's dreams. Sometimes I take some personal horrifying things or like little traumas in my own life that I will make into abstractions and then turn them into horror stories, essentially. Sure. I find it interesting that you said the word personal, because I would say a lot of them just stem from me playing around with like personal traumas and then exploring them in abstract, bigger ways and just making them into horror stories.
I get you. So there's 7 total horror stories in this anthology. So why don't you walk us through like your top 2 favorite ones? Don't spoil too much, but
okay. That's really hard. Several people have told me that the first one is their favorite, A Date with the Devil, and I at first thought that that was my least favorite. It was one that I wrote just entirely in one sitting, and I didn't know how I felt about it until other people started liking it. Like my editor, she loved it. And my personal favorite one, I think, is Devil in the Woods. I think just as far as me learning as I'm writing, I think that I finally got pacing down. I think that story is probably the best display of pacing in anything that I've written so far. So I liked that aspect of it. Helping Hands is the beginning of a novel that I'm working on. And so, I mean, I really enjoyed writing that story so much that I wanted to continue it on and go so much further and deeper into it. So I would say probably Helping Hands and Devil in the Woods are my top two out of the collection.
Okay, so let's pick at that one a little bit.
Okay.
So Helping Hands, just in about 100 words or less, what would you say it's about? That counts as a word. You're down to 99.
All right. It is about a person named Alex. The gender is never stated. And Alex thinks that Alex is doing something good. And the theme of it just takes mankind's ability to take the most beautiful messages and turn them into horrifying realities. Alex wants to save people, but then after reading the story, you realize exactly what being saved is. And in a nutshell, it's got a lot of cultish and sexual undertones. I'm probably going over my word count right now.
112, 113.
It's got a lot of cultish and sexual undertones, and it's in a nutshell is kind of a demonic pyramid scheme built on suicide and depression, but is disguised as love and eternal families.
So that's a lot of very cheerful words all sandwiched into one sentence.
So that's kind of it in a nutshell, but it gets more into that in the book itself. Like you just get like a little glimpse of Alex's first saved soul and a little bit of how Alex has been saved himself. But the book goes much deeper into that.
I think there's kind of something interesting to extrapolate on there, because if you haven't noticed, Bobby here is a very cheerful, friendly individual. And you see that with a lot of horror writers. Have you experienced that too?
I have. I think we stay perky by killing people on paper. And that's how we kind of relieve our stress. Writing has always been a ballast for me. So whenever I'm frustrated or feeling a lot of tense emotional energy, it's a way for me to express all of it onto the page in however dark and brutal fashion I please. And then I feel so much better afterwards.
Sure. And I understand you've interacted with a lot of other horror writers in your time as well, yes?
Yeah. We started a group called Denver Horror Collective, and we did an anthology that we introduced at the beginning of this year. And we are planning another one. We're kind of dialing down the theme. But we do like lots of critiques for other horror writers, so anybody can kind of join Denver Horror Collective. And so we have kind of gotten big to where we've like broken off into like several novel writing groups, which forces us to produce something each month, because you're supposed to have something to contribute each time. And then we also have like monthly short story critiques that people will meet up in groups. I unfortunately have not been able to make it to many lately because my life has been a little wild, but it's been great to collaborate with a bunch of people and just get feedback and just connect with other people who love the horror genre, which is like people either love horror or they hate it.
Valid that, yeah. Do you also ever have that moment where you're interacting with people and you have to like take a second to pause, like, oh, that's right, not everybody watches dismemberment Netflix straight to VHS movies for fun? Yeah?
Yes. I mean, even though we're all like, even with just working with horror writers, we are so varied. We have different, like, you can take one similar theme and we're all going to create completely different things because we're interested in different aspects of horror. And some people love slasher flicks, and some people love just only watch 80s horror, and some people and some people are just exploring, where they've written like dark fantasy or something and they just kind of want to take that next step into the horror.
Sure. So that actually raises an interesting line of thought, and this has been something that's kind of been a point of very passionate discussion in our writers' room back channel. What makes something a horror story specifically? Like, what criteria does something have to hit for you to consider it horror?
Ooh, that is a really good question.
Or I guess more specifically, like, in theory, being trapped in a building full of people that want to murder you is scary, right?
Yeah.
So is Die Hard a horror movie?
No.
Okay, why not?
Because it's more of a lot of times it's like establishing the tone, and like it takes more than just the setting. I mean, obviously Die Hard's, you know, awesome action movie, but horror, for example, like Helping Hands, like that story isn't, it's horror, but it's not meant to scare you, but it is meant to make you uncomfortable. Sometimes it'll make you feel icky inside, although some other genres can do that too. But horror just has kind of like this element of you being, I mean, horrified. Like, you can be scared or you can be horrified or mortified that something has happened, where it's like you're not feeling like a rush of adrenaline and you're not like jumping, but at the same time it's impacting you in a very uncomfortable, eerie, freaky way.
So then I guess the follow-up question for like all of our viewers out there that don't consider like dismemberment, terror, trauma to be an enjoyable pastime, what do you think the hook of that is? Why do we go out of our way to just subjugate ourselves to that kind of trauma?
I mean, Stephen King once compared it to like the modern day lynching that we just crave. That there's just like some dark part of us that kind of just craves, maybe it's violence, maybe it's horror, gore. I'm not sure. I mean, some people hate being scared. They hate horror movies so much, and I just like that adrenaline feel of, and the suspense, the like not knowing what's gonna happen, like the on the edge of your seat type of thing. I think it's, I don't know. Some of us just have like that weird dark craving for fake horror, not real life horror.
I get that. I get that.
But like it's experiencing horror, but like through a screen or through.
Yeah, it's the difference between like a movie and one of those extreme haunted houses.
Exactly. Where you get to explore things that are horrifying and violent in a safe way.
Sure. So, are there any specific like bits of imagery or recurring narrative themes or antagonists that you find yourself going back to?
I would say that a common theme that kind of pops up in my writing a lot, like I seem to really enjoy the unreliable narrator perspective.
Sure.
I kind of really enjoy the weird predator-prey relationship, and exploring just kind of like sometimes there's lots of sensual tones in like some of the book, some of my writing, just kind of like connecting with a being that is truly horrifying, but in like an almost sensual way. Not gonna get into why I think that is a thing, but it's that whole just like this weird relationships with horrifying figures that you kind of could sometimes be okay with seems to pop up a lot. So yeah, I would say the predator-prey relationship is probably one of the most frequent
Sure.
themes that appears in there.
Kind of cycle you back out of that, because you mentioned something interesting about unreliable narrator. And that's something that we've seen pop up a lot, both in and out of horror, kind of in this digital age, because, you know, we all of a sudden have this massive new form of communication where there's not necessarily a way to guarantee authenticity. And so now that people are latching more and more onto the concept of an unreliable narrator as like a point of view device, as a plot device, what do you think the benefits of writing from that perspective are? Or what kind of stuff do you think you can do with that you wouldn't otherwise be able to in a story?
Well, if you're telling it from an unreliable narrator perspective, you can kind of play around with your reader a bit, because you're telling a story through the eyes of another person. And whether that person is intentionally withholding information from you, or just so naive themselves that their perspective is what is right in their mind, and they're telling you that it's right in their mind, but you as the reader are having to realize and understand that even though the narrator thinks that they're doing whatever their beliefs are, you as the reader can develop your own beliefs in opposition or go along with them. But you can't really do that when you're telling that from, like, you can't play with the reader as much if you're just telling a story from those different perspectives, like the third person or omniscient. Like, the omniscient narrator is never going to tell you something that is incorrect. Sure, there might be twists and turns in plot itself, but when you're telling it through the eyes of a character, you're creating a person, and you experience that the way that you would if you have an unreliable friend or somebody else. And so I would say that perspective is fun to write from, because it really helps you create an authentic character to tell a story from.
Sure, I get that. Well, we're just about out of time here. Before we go, though, I do want to get your input on something. This has been trending in the news. And Norway actually has been developing this new system where they put barcodes on the sides of ships. So whenever they enter and leave the harbor, that barcode registers. And so it's so that whenever these Norwegian ships enter and leave port, they can Scandinavian. Yeah. All right.
That almost took me a second.
All right. Well, we're just talking about unreliable and destructive things that can be done with the written language. So on that note, would you mind sending us off with a little bit of a readout?
Sure.
Awesome. I actually went ahead and marked off a chapter for you.
Okay.
If you wouldn't mind reading a little bit of the intro to Devil in the Woods.
All
I think
right.
this is a bit of prose that really exemplifies kind of the sensory impact of Bobby Crew's writing. Just whenever you're ready.
How long do you think he's been dead? I asked. My voice was shaky and harsh. My throat burned from all the noise I had made when I almost tripped over the dead man, what was left of him, half buried in the dry leaves. The smell weighed down the air as putrid particles filled my lungs. I gagged again. I wondered how it was possible I hadn't noticed the awful smell before seeing the body. At least a few days, Brad said. He was down on one knee, examining the gruesome sight. The lower half of the body was covered in the dead leaves. The poor man's face was mostly gone, and his head was unrecognizable and covered in wriggling larvae. His shirt was entirely ripped away. I had the sudden urge to vomit again, but it emptied my stomach almost immediately after seeing and smelling the corpse. Instead, my whole body convulsed in disgust, yet I was still horrifically mesmerized. Maybe longer. He stood up and exhaled loudly. God, that stinks. What do you think got him? I asked. I couldn't look away, despite my best effort to move my head. There were several jagged slashes in his chest, but they didn't look like teeth marks. Claw marks, maybe?
All right, thank you. If you're the kind of person that likes that very sensory, very personal horror, when dealing with devils, it's written by our lovely Bobby Crew. Go out and buy it. Or else. Or else.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, thank you guys for tuning into OCN Writers Room. If you're just joining us on this channel, we've got all sorts of other awesome content available. We've got double feature. Our twins go over a couple of pop culture and nerd culture movies and stuff. We've got Parental Composure. Make sure to check them out. If you guys like this video, please give us a like and subscribe. And if you know of any other authors or independent projects that you'd like us to talk about, make sure to leave us a comment below. My name is Andre Gilbert, and thank you guys for joining us.